Hello, welcome to episode 125 of the CRICKETher Weekly. We've left Birmingham, we're now in London, and we're actually stood just outside the Oval. And we're here because the 100 has started this week, the Women's 100, which is the only 100 that matters as far as we're concerned. And we are here to watch the Oval Invincibles against the Southern Braves. So it's a bit of a big one today, isn't it, Sid? And I know who you're going to be supporting because everyone knows who you're going to be supporting.
I'm supporting Cricket Raf.
Okay, fair enough. We're going to talk a little bit more about the start of the 100 in a minute, but first of all there's been a couple of big bits of news that have dropped this week, one of which is taking us by surprise, the other one maybe not so much, and we'll start with the one that did take us a bit by surprise, which is the fact that Meg Lanning has taken an indefinite break from cricket for personal reasons, and Cricket Australia have deliberately said please can we give her privacy, and there's no timeline for her return. So that was a bit of a surprise, Sid, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean we did talk about Meg Lanning briefly 2 weeks ago, and we speculated that having kind of won the World Cup as captain, that she might have a bit of a change in attitude and it might change her perspective on life a little bit, because it was the one thing that she still had to achieve in her career, which was to win that 50 over World Cup as a captain, and she's now added the Commonwealth Games to that. You pointed out at the time that she will have really wanted to win that gold medal in the Commonwealth Games. She did that, and then almost immediately, almost as if she had the speech ready planned, she was like, I'm not going to do the 100, and I'm going to take some time for myself and do the stuff I need to do in my life, whatever it is. We genuinely don't know what that is, but we wish her well, don't we?
Of course we do. We absolutely wish her all the best, and I think that we should avoid totally speculating about what it might be or whatever it is the reasons behind this, but I think if I may, I might draw out a couple of things because I think that this is potentially tells us something wider about women's cricket and the women's cricket landscape, and the first thing is it's about the impact of professionalism, isn't it, and in particular the added scrutiny that brings and the added pressure that brings on the mental health of players, and the fact that for somebody of the generation before Meg Lanning, this wouldn't have been an issue so much, because between tours, after the Commonwealth Games, they would have been herring it back to work, and they would have been going, or back to their studies, and they would have been doing that, and they therefore would have had a natural break from cricket. Now what we're seeing is that the schedule is so intense, and that the pressures and the scrutiny are so intense that somebody like Meg Lanning needs to actually kind of do this very conscious thing of saying, I'm going to take a break, and that's perhaps a downside of professionalism. We often talk about the upsides of professionalism, but that's maybe a little bit of a downside of professionalism. The second thing I'd say is that I think that we need to be a bit wary, actually, because I've seen some kind of almost some media criticism in the last few days saying, the boards are demanding too much of Meg Lanning, they're asking her to do things that are unreasonable, they're asking her to have a kind of schedule that's unreasonable, not just the boards but the ICC with all the World Cups and with the Commonwealth Games and all of those tournaments, and it's all adding up and it's all getting a bit too much, and it's kind of about almost the greed of cricket boards who demand so much of their players nowadays. Okay, let's rewind back a few months ago to the launch of the Fair Break tournament. Now, Cricket Australia deliberately kept most of their players from playing in that tournament, and received a lot of criticism for doing that, whereas the ECB and other cricket boards let their players go and play in it. And there was criticism, as I say, levelled at Cricket Australia for that decision. Well, actually, it looks like having been a decent decision, because otherwise it adds an extra pressure to the players to go out and play in those tournaments. And as we see more of those T20 franchise tournaments springing up around the world, we've got a promise of a women's IPL now, a promise of a Pakistan Women's Premier League, we've got the Women's Caribbean Premier League coming up. This is only going to be more of a problem. And we, as the media, are kind of welcoming this and saying, isn't this brilliant? Isn't it brilliant that people can go and play in Fair Break and people can go and play in the Women's IPL, and we're demanding it. But actually what we're doing then is putting more pressure on players between international tours to go and play in these tournaments. So we need to think about the consistency of what we're saying and what we're demanding of them, actually.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's important to recognise as well that the proliferation of short tournaments is in some ways a good thing. I mean, Sean Martin spoke. I think was it when he spoke to you that he talked about the the idea that fair break was a short tournament, therefore that was good for the players. But the proliferation of a lot of short tournaments actually is not good, because you're here and then you're there and then you're there and you don't get any chance to settle anywhere. That something like a proper full-blown women's IPL, which would actually be like a couple of months, would actually be an easier proposition in some ways, because at least you go, okay, I'm here now and I'm here for 2 months and I'm not here just on a flying visit, one hotel, the next hotel, out. You can kind of settle in a country and settle in a culture a bit more. So I think that it's the shortness of these tournaments can also add to that burden. And Meg Lanning's taken the decision that she's going to kind of opt out of that. She's going to opt out of the 100. She's going to take that break. I think that we'll see her back. I think that she remains an ambitious person. I think that there'll be more that she still feels that she can achieve, and she will probably do that. But it's obviously going to be a while before we do that.
Absolutely. Okay, and the second big bit of news that we had this week was something that was perhaps less unexpected for us, Sid, and that is that Lisa Keightley, the England coach, has chosen to publicly announce that she will be stepping down from her role in a few weeks' time. So her final gig with England will be that series of T20s and ODIs in September. So it's an interesting one, and actually reading her body language after England lost that semi-final against England, and she was brought up England lost that semi-final against India, and she was brought up to do press at the end of that. She did look quite downbeat, didn't she, Sid?
Yeah, I mean, Lisa Keightley can be quite a sort of business-like person when she sort of puts her professional face on. So in front of the media, she can be business-like, but in private, she can definitely be a fun person. The viewers of this podcast saw when she literally gate crashed this podcast about a year or so ago in Hove. And so she can definitely a person that wears a smile, privately, even if she can be quite business-like, in front of the media. But what we saw in front of the media after the Commonwealth Games was not business-like Lisa Keightley. It was a very down, almost, I don't want to put a medical diagnosis on anything, but almost a depressed Lisa Keightley. She was very down. She was, she was just like, it was obviously, she was obviously finding things, difficult, and it's been, a really challenging 2 years. Let's not forget this. So, has Lisa Keightley succeeded as England coach? Well, I mean, ultimately, England haven't beaten Australia. They haven't won a major tournament. On the other hand, her success record, her win-loss record is pretty much the same as Mark Robinson's was. What's really important as well to acknowledge is that she's gone through such a tough period, that having to manage a team through that COVID period was just like the ultimate challenge. There was no textbook on this, right, Raf?
No, absolutely. Basically, everyone was making it up as they went along, and she took over right before COVID started. I think we should say that it was difficult for her personally, because she wasn't able to get back to Australia. She wasn't able to have her partner come to England to spend time with her, and that's really hard. Obviously, she knew it was going to mean periods of time away from home, but she didn't think she was going to get caught up in a global pandemic whereby there was literally no way for her to get to Australia, and vice versa. So that's been very difficult for her. But as you say, from a professional perspective, trying to work through all of these new COVID regulations, the idea of imposing a bubble on a team, nobody had any idea what that looked like, and even when it was put into place, nobody really knew what the impact was going to be on players' mental health. She's had to go through all of that as the coach, and just try and kind of manage that along the way and behind the scenes, and deal with, we know that some of the England players have spoken about the fact that they have suffered depression, and that COVID bubbles have really contributed to that. And so I think that's been really difficult for Lisa Keightley, and that she's negotiated it generally pretty well. And I tried to kind of convey that in the piece that I wrote for The Guardian about it. So yeah, I think if we're reflecting on her period as coach, we have to see that her having negotiated that is kind of one of her successes. Obviously, the big question, Sid, is who's going to succeed her?
Well, the name on everyone's lips, isn't it? Everyone's already going to be whispering this back into the screen. It's going to be Charlotte Edwards. So before the Vipers, not the Vipers match, before the Brave match the other day, she was...
Not the same.
No, not the same. She was asked about this by Nick Knight, and she said, well, I haven't really had a chance to think about it yet. It's all come so quickly, and but it's obviously something that people are going to say, well, is she the obvious candidate? And probably she is. but is she actually going to go for it? That's the real question. One issue that Nick Knight raised was, there's still quite a few players playing that she played with when she was an England player and when she was a professional cricketer. Is how much of a challenge does that represent? She kind of acknowledged that challenge, but why might that be a particular challenge, Raf?
Right, after a brief change of location, after our camera overheating, let me just answer that question that you've just asked me, Sid. So will it be a challenge for Charlotte Edwards to be coaching people who she played alongside as a professional? And I think it will be for a few reasons. The first one is obviously there's going to be an element of awkwardness, I think, even though as far as we know, the two of them have a good personal relationship. But with Lottie taking over as coach and Heather Knight being captain, because Heather Knight, we know, did directly take over from Lottie as captain in quite difficult circumstances for Charlotte Edwards. So I think that could potentially be a bit of a tricky one for her to negotiate. I also think it's difficult for her because she is good friends with some of the senior players in the England team. Somebody like Catherine Brunt, who potentially the coach really needs to handle quite carefully and to be able to kind of have that sort of coaching authority over. And if you're trying to go from being very good friends with somebody to then kind of almost managing them, that's quite tricky. I think we've all been through those situations in work environments, and so I'm not saying that she wouldn't be capable of doing it, but that's possibly something that she's going to be thinking about, because it may be that it would be easier for her to take on the role in a couple of years' time when somebody like Catherine Brunt has retired. So we will keep speculating amongst ourselves about who might replace Lisa Keightley. Shall we move on to talk about the 100 now, Sid?
Absolutely. Okay,
so we're here at the Oval. We were here the other day for the first match in this year's Women's 100, and Oval Invincibles won that one quite convincingly against the Superchargers. It's been quite an exciting start to the tournament. We've seen huge scores this year in comparison to the average scores that were happening last year, so we're really seeing the kind of direct impact of professionalism there on the women's game. We're a year on and it's a year bigger, it's great so far. So we've had one round of matches. Rockets are actually, Trent Rockets are top of the table after beating Welsh Fire yesterday, I think it was, because they've got the best run rate. And then the other teams who have won a game are Phoenix, Invincibles and Brave. So Rockets at the top, Sid, are they going to stay there?
Yeah, they've actually beat the Manchester Originals.
What did I say?
You said something else.
Okay. I think I'm overheating, Sid. I think I need to change location. It
is very hot. I think that they have got the best net run rate at the moment. I think that's partly a factor of the Originals were quite poor with the bat. I struggle to understand what it really is with the Manchester teams, because they've got good players in there, but just to somehow put them in a domestic environment, it's exactly the same with the Thunder. They just don't seem to gel, and they were not gelling the other day. So that gave the Trent Rockets a chance to make early headway, but really I think it's again from what we've already seen, it's all going to be about the Southern Brave and the Oval Invincibles, and they're the two teams that we're going to be seeing today, so that's really exciting. The Southern Brave have just an awesome lineup. It's just like there's no weak links. You look down that they've got such a strong team that they can afford to play a specialist wicketkeeper that they're batting at 11. I mean, that says everything about the strength there. They're leaving Paige Schofield and Tara Norris on the bench, so in order to be able to do that means that all of the rest of the team are such solid players, and there really are no weak links. So I think it's difficult to look beyond them.
Sid, you are a bit biased though, aren't you? Because we kind of got your Southern Vipers bias coming through here. So I'm going to step in now and say that I think that a couple of the other teams who are really going to be quite tricky to beat this year are obviously Oval Invincibles, and let's be honest, it's the Alice Capty factor. She pulls it out of the bag over and over again. She gives herself a black eye and comes out and makes runs for England. In this instance, she did something which looked absolutely excruciating from the sidelines to her ankle/knee. Then had to limp off, and then decided to come back on and then score the winning runs in very, very comprehensive fashion by smashing 4 consecutive boundaries. And how amazing was that to watch?
Oh, it was a fantastic performance, wasn't it? And also, we must give some credit to Lauren Winfield-Hill. has been just huge in domestic cricket all season. She's turned it on for Yorkshire, sorry, not Yorkshire, Diamonds, and you know she's come down south for this, and she's turned it on here again, and she was the top scorer, and she set up the Invincibles position for Capsy to be able to do what she did.
And there's something there about the Invincibles team environment, isn't there? Because Lauren Winfield-Hill has been able to transition into that very easily, and says that she's basically just having a great time and having a lot of fun. And I think that Donnay van Niekerk has a lot to do with that team culture, which was one of the reasons why they won last year, after all. The other team who I've definitely got my eye on is Birmingham Phoenix. I mean, Sophie Devine opening the batting, she is in such brilliant form, and it is just wonderful to watch. And they've also got Amy Jones behind the stumps, and let's be honest, she probably is the best wicketkeeper in the world. Sorry Alyssa Healy, sorry to our Australian viewers, but Amy Jones is something special, and that's a very important factor in the 100 that and in any domestic competition that I think often we underestimate. So yeah, those are my teams to beat. One thing that we have seen this year in the 100, and in particular in that opening game, is that they are playing some of the women's matches second instead of first. What do we make of that, Sid? Other than that, it's a bit annoying for us because we have to leave when everyone else is leaving instead of when the men's game's going on.
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting one, isn't it? I think that what we did see from the game that we saw here the other day, where the women played second, was that a large amount of people stayed. So we reckon well over half the crowd stayed. But what was really significant, therefore, was that those people saw the entire game. So what we've typically been seeing is people will file in during the women's game, and they've been measuring the women's attendance from the halfway point in the women's game. So typically the stands are quite empty at the beginning of the women's game, and they're starting to fill up by the time you get into the middle. What we saw yesterday was that they were half full from the early point. So I reckon yesterday, of the group stage of matches, was probably one of the biggest crowds that we've seen that have watched the entire match of all of the double headers that we've seen, because almost all the other double headers have started off quite thin. So I think that there was potential for the women's game to therefore actually wind up with more people watching the entire game, which at the end of the day is really what we want to get out of that.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. I did get a bit nervous because there is something demoralising about watching people leave right before the women's game is due to start, which is obviously not a problem you have when the women's game is played first. It somehow doesn't feel as insulting when people come a bit late to the women's game than if they actively kind of get up out of their seats and move and decide to leave the ground even when there's another match, a women's match, still to be played. So I was a little bit nervous, but as you say, I think that actually, and some of the people at the Oval, some of the Surrey guys were actually kind of saying, well, many more people stayed than we actually expected to stay. And there was actually a bit of a kerfuffle with people getting out, I think, because they had maybe not anticipated that so many people would stay and then everyone would be leaving right at the end. They'd anticipated a lot more people leaving between the games, so that's really positive from a women's cricket perspective, and quite exciting to see. So maybe we have to look beyond our own personal inconvenience and think about the health of the women's game overall. So yeah, really great innovation so far, and we're really enjoying the 100, aren't we? We're really looking forward to the rest of it.
Yeah, I'm particularly looking forward to today. It's going to be a huge match. Of course, by the time most people see this will have been done. Could this be the match that decides who will make it directly into the final? We'll see.
Great. Well, we'll wrap up there. Thanks very much for joining us as ever, and see you next week. Bye.
Bye.